So, welcome to our first time this book study on the religion of the apostles. And we're recording it, so as the discussion goes, Ethan's going to try and capture people's comments or questions. You don't have to self-identify, but how many of you actually read all the way?
Wait, you mean as opposed to listen to?
I listen to it too. I don't know how you would listen to this book unless you're like...
It was hard, I will admit it was hard.
Yeah. So we're dealing with a group of eager viewers, people who actually read the book.
I read it last year when we
Okay,
were going through it. I have it refreshed.
Fair enough. Okay, so maybe a more important question. How many of you understood what you were reading?
After I read it the second time.
I had listened to the Lord of Spirits. So
So that was
that
help, the
helps.
Lord of Spirits.
Yeah.
Right. So hopefully what we can do, the format, is a discussion format. I'm not here to sort of lecture on the book and. Well, I could.
I'm out here. Always am up for a good lecture,
Yeah. Well, I could say a few things, but
Sure.
What I would prefer to do is have a conversation about the book, and I'm happy to go any direction that goes. I know that our fearless leader, Chris, has prepared a few questions if we sort of stall out. But yeah, you want to kind of dig into it? And we'll just kind of start. All right, anybody with an opening salvo? Question, comment about what you read? Crickets. That's good.
Well, I will say I was unaware of the whole Trinity issue as far as a large percentage of Christianity having this theory that it evolved. I was even unaware of that. I had no idea that was the founding belief of a lot of the Christian world. So it was interesting to me that it's important to show that that's not true, and I can certainly understand why.
Yeah.
But I didn't even know about it.
Yeah, and there's kind of two aspects to that. One of them is that it's not only kind of a historical, inaccuracy, right? But also it helps sort of, if you will, buttress one of the points he's trying to make in the book. That when you walk in and there's the vestments and the chanting and the incense and the fasting, and that's not something that, the church sort of dreamt up, right? And that's part of also why he's bringing in that point, But I think a lot of people are unaware, right, of Second Temple spirituality, right? I got to be careful of everything I say because there's a professor of such things. Down. But also that the Judaism that people are practicing today is something that came around a little bit later. Right?
That's interesting.
So, yeah. Any other comments on what were you in a similar boat?
Yeah, I thought the whole rabbinic Judaism movement was sort of interesting, and I just wasn't aware of how that happened and why that happened. And it was
Yeah, and it's pretty interesting too because you can enter into. I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood, and all of my good friends were Jewish, and I would attend temple with them on occasion, and it was not the type of liturgical, spiritual, but more of. He talks about maybe it's a little bit more about morality, right? It's not always the case, right? And then my Jewish friends that would come to the church with me. It was interesting to see their reaction to that, and oftentimes they were like, this actually is quite moving, and I'm kind of bored in temple, but anyway.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that whole, I think it was in the introduction, that about Paul being, part of really a mystical Jewish faith at that point, and that he really wasn't converted. I mean, talk about putting my Protestant background on turning the tables. What? Paul? Anyway, this was just part of his tradition to encounter the mystical. So that was very revealing to me. And anyway.
Yeah, I think that, a lot of times, what's the lens that we're reading the Old Testament through? And do we understand those appearances of the second person of the Trinity? right, as the Christ, right? It's certainly the understanding of the church, but growing up maybe in a Protestant mindset, you don't see it that way, right? You have a different view of it, you know.
Yeah, that was definitely very illuminating to me. Like similarly, just like realizing all the stories of like the rock and just all of that. It's like yeah, of course that's Jesus. It was like so obvious. Like it was just filtered in such a different way before, and so that it was really illuminating the way he talked about it. I loved it.
Yeah, how was it understood, I guess, in that former mindset?
Well, in the beginning was the Word, but then he showed up at being born of Mary. You know, like nothing happened to me, nothing really happened, even though John, in the book of John, says, you know, I believed Christ, you know, in the Trinity was eternal, but you just didn't see him until he was incarnated. That was sort of my background.
Yeah, I would say, sorry.
No, I was just saying, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I would say like I thought of it as like the Father, but the Father was like separate, different. It was like a different God almost. It's like that's not how it was taught, but that's like I realized that's almost how I was thinking of it, even though it wasn't necessarily taught that way. It was like Jesus was something that was, like you said, in the beginning, and then came, and then it was like they were, I don't know, it was really interesting.
So they were sort of invisible until he was incarnate.
But and again, it's not that it was taught that way, but for whatever reason, that's how I filtered through my brain that's like kind of what was happening.
Yeah, you're kind of articulating an early heresy of the church.
He's not naming you particularly.
I'm just listening.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting how often those heresies are recycled, right? You know, right? Many Christians today are really Gnostics, in many ways, or Arians.
Oh.
Right? That's another one. So, I once did a camp T-shirt, and we had all sorts of slogans on the back, like "Honk 40 times if you're Orthodox." I'd rather be prostrating. And one of them, yeah, and you got meta. It was Arius Schmarius. What else came out to you in the book, especially in the beginning, as you're reading it, and those ideas around the Old Testament, the appearances of Christ, and even Paul's quote-unquote lack of conversion, right? But maybe an illumination of, that's who you are, right?
I think for me, like even just the whole idea of the religion of the apostles, you know, as a Protestant, often we, at least in the world I was in, we would talk about like trying to read like what Jesus was doing and saying in the context of like the history going on there. But it was always kind of like, it wasn't religious history or like the faith history. It was always kind of like, well, this is kind of what the customs were. This is what, when Jesus talks about a camel going through the eye of the needle, or said there was some weird, like, well, this is historically kind of what was going on culturally at the time. And to have like Second Temple Judaism explained, and that context of what was going on is something that I just had never heard or encountered. I didn't, you know, I don't know if this, I can't remember if this book goes into it, but some of those, like the literature that was going around at that time, that they talk about in Lord of Spirits a lot, and like the Book of Jubilees, or things like that were being referenced and used at the time. I just had never heard of any of that, and it seems obvious now, like, oh, well, yeah, like there was a religious context that Jesus existed in. It's probably important to understand what that was. It illumines a lot of the kind of strange things that he says.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and you know, to be fair, just to give us a little broader context, you know, some of what Father Stephen's talking about and writing about and arguing for is disputed, right? You know, it's not as if, you know, there's, you know, 100% agreement that as he's presenting, you know, the religious context, that this is what scholars would agree to. But he's making an argument, right? Certainly so. And it is helpful, too, because how many of you even distinguish between that idea of Masoretic and Septuagint?
Yeah, not really. I mean,
Are you still a little confused?
Explain.
Okay. So he talks about his citations, right? And how many of you so far have said, when Father Evan reads the 50th Psalm, that's the 51st Psalm.
Right.
Has anybody had that problem yet?
Yes.
Not anymore.
No.
Figured it out.
Right, when you have your Orthodox study Bible, you're like, oh, okay. So the Psalms are numbered differently. That's kind of an easy one, right? But there's also this sense in which the Masoretic, that's the Jewish-based text, right? And it is not as old as the Septuagint, which is the Greek text, those Alexandrian scholars, right, who put together the text. So part of what you're talking about is also just understanding the context in which, like even the early New Testament writers, right, they're writing out of context of the Septuagint. They're not writing out of context of the Masoretic, and the kind of understanding that is in that text, right? That's the adopted text of the church. Later, what becomes prevalent in the thinking of Christians is that the Septuagint is not the correct text, but the Masoretic would be. Right?
Was the Masoretic text where they added the vowels, something?
They added the what?
Added the vowels. Because in the original Hebrew, there wouldn't be vowels. Or that's what...
Well, what I'm addressing is the idea of sort of from where is the church in the period of the New Testament writing from? It's writing out of the context of the Septuagint, not out of the Masoretic. And then, of course, the Masoretic, the canon, right? If it's a Greek-based text, the Masoretic, according to Luther, it's not part of the canon anymore, right? So you see a difference in the canon of the Old Testament between Protestants and Orthodox, right? And they'll say, well, they've got a funny Bible, right? And then if you're Catholic, you end up calling those funny books deuterocanonical. We don't use that terminology. It's just part of the canon. It's period, right? But it's along what you're talking about, right? Other thoughts about?
I think to me it was, kind of going on that Old Testament, when you read the Orthodox Study Bible and it talks about those pre-configurations and it talks about those sort of foretellings, and then this kind of helps put that into shape because when the apostles were preaching in the synagogues, like they didn't have the Gospels and they didn't have the epistles because they weren't written yet. And so really it's interesting because those ideas in those sort of notes are probably what they were preaching, right? Because they were using those Old Testament texts because that's what they use. And so it's kind of interesting that those footnotes that I think a lot of the Protestants kind of forget about the Old Testament, those footnotes, but that really is that oral history of the apostles who were in those synagogues at the beginning saying like, no, Jonah and the whale, that's pre-configuring Christ. And so it just added this extra complexity to me about that. That was really nice.
Yeah. So that even when Paul says, all scripture is profitable, what is he talking about?
The Old Testament.
He's not talking about the New Testament.
Yeah.
That doesn't, he's not considering his writings as canon, right, or scripture, right? He's considering the Old Testament, and that is really, if you look at the early apologists, they're using the Old Testament scriptures, to speak to, let's say, the theological controversies of their day, right, or the resistance, to the idea that Jesus is the Christ, in the second person of the Trinity, right?
So then they would have, they would have to know of kind of like his argument, they would have to know the Son existed. Because if they're going to the synagogues to say, we found the Son, right? Like it would have to be that was already embedded in that culture, that there was this other hypostasis that wasn't the Father. Because if they went into a synagogue and said like, oh, there's like a whole new hypostasis, and people were like, what does that even mean? So it makes sense that they already understood that there was a Father and a Son.
Yeah, and we can have a very kind of flattened view of Israel. We do this with a lot of things. We sort of oversimplify them. We even do that now with like Orthodox. Like Orthodox are all kind of like the same. And that's not true, right?
Right.
Even in the expression of the faith, if you go to Georgia, you go to Romania, you come to America, Greece, or Russia, it's expressed in unique ways, right? It's not changing. But now with what he's arguing for is that, as you were pointing out, there's a lot going on.
He does say that too, that like there were I mean, even in the Bible, the Pharisees and the Sadducees are two different expressions of Judaism at the time, and there were a bunch more outside of that too. There wasn't this like monolithic Jewish people. So,
Yeah, just as there's probably not a consensus in this room of whether Russell Wilson should remain or go. Maybe we're getting towards a consensus.
there's a money issue there.
Yeah.
So you should give it back to the Christian.
Jesus.
I don't know.
He's the quarterback of the woeful Denver Broncos.
So there's no.
Yeah. Other things that came out in that opening part. Yeah, Maddie.
Kind of going off of what Chris was talking about, I feel like I'm having to look at the story of the Bible now not from a chronological perspective, but knowing that everything is tied to who Jesus is.
Yes.
I think it's so tempting for me because you read the Bible from front to back, you just go all the way through it, and that's one way of reading it. But if you're not looking at it from the perspective of everything happening in the Old Testament is revealing who Christ is, and don't always just think of it as something happening in the future, that happens. This stuff just happened back here. Like, I don't think I'm explaining that very well, but like...
I think you're doing a great job.
Okay. But like, the human idea of time doesn't quite apply to Jesus' story. Does that...
Correct.
Am I phrasing that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, certainly God does not exist and he's not confined by chronology, right? You know, another way, let's just think about this sort of within the context of the church. What is placed on the altar?
The sacrifice.
Oh, yeah, thank you. But let me say touche. When we're talking about the scriptures, what is placed on the altar?
The gospel.
Yes, all of them? All the gospels? All the stories?
Or just
No, it's just the ones that pertain to Christ, right? Just,
Only certain pericopes
right.
are on the altar.
Yeah.
So we even distinguish within Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John what stories we are going to read.
Right.
Have you ever read in the church the story of the temple tax when Peter went fishing?
No.
It's not. You won't find it in the lectionary, right? So we've got certain stories from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John on the altar table. Okay, where's the Old Testament? Is it on the altar? No, not anymore. Where is it?
It's in the chanting and the
In
liturgy.
the readings,
Right.
the epistle.
And
Well, not the epistles.
yeah, it's not read as it's read on Vespers, right? Who reads the Old Testament?
Everybody. The chanter.
Who reads the Gospels?
The priest or deacon.
Right. And is there a procession?
Yeah.
Is there hallelujah? So your point is made even within the way that we have arranged how we live liturgically, that we place this sort of lens of the New Testament on and the story of Christ, and then we read everything else through that, right? And so I guess, in a sense, it would make sense when you walk out of a liturgical life that you can kind of come to an understanding of, oh, I read this as its own thing, and I don't really apply the lens of the Gospels to this story. Is that making sense to everybody? You following what we're talking about? Yeah? Okay. So it's an essential point you're making, right? Okay. Other thoughts?
Can I ask a question that's
Yeah.
sort of related to all this? It's I don't know if it comes up in the book directly, but Father Stephen has alluded to it. The question has been posed, like, is it like the post-resurrected Christ that's showing up in those Old Testament stories?
The post-resurrected Christ?
Yeah, like when Christ is resurrected, is that what is...
In which stories? The Old Testament
the Old
stories?
Testament?
It is not my understanding that it's the pre-incarnate
It's
Christ.
pre-incarnate.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's my understanding that I have. So, for example, we speak of the encounter with Melchizedek as a type of Christ, right? He offers bread and wine, right? And then the priesthood of Melchizedek is compared in Paul, right? He says this is the priesthood of Christ, right? So that's the understanding. And so the angel of the Lord, right, it's a pre-incarnate Christ, not a post-resurrectional Christ.
But the three that come and eat with Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
So one of them was Christ, but he was eating.
Yes.
So he was, incarnate. He was flesh.
That's not how the church would express that
So
thought.
how? It's a mystery, huh? Okay.
It's a mystery.
It's a mystery.
I think it can get dangerous if we're trying to over-articulate some of these, if we're trying to sort of box up these stories and line them all out, it can get a little dangerous, right? There is some ambiguity and some tension in the stories, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is, So, we all say, Merry Christmas. Yeah, Merry Christmas. And what are we celebrating? Oh, that the Lord of the universe was born. Nobody pauses. What do you mean? He became flesh? Oh, yeah. Emmanuel. Hey, wait a minute. Anybody get that? Do you get it? Right? I don't. So, when you're walking that back into that story, and then okay.
Yeah.
The Oak Manna, and it's visitation, and they eat. Wait a minute. Yeah, I don't know.
How does that work?
It's also I'm not sure what, this is going to sound crass, but what difference does it make, in a sense? How does that help you? I'm not sure. How does that clear up anything, or how does it confuse something? So that's what I would wonder. Why would that be a point? So that I don't know. That is a question. Why would people think that's an interesting question? What do they think is the result of that? Is it just a way of trying to understand time? Are they trying to understand something?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
That's what it's about. It's a time thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
How God
All right,
exists in and out of time.
Yeah.
And could the resurrected Christ go anywhere?
He could.
I guess it's,
He's outside himself.
I guess that's
Interesting.
I guess that's
It is kind of
so there you have it.
It's
Whatever.
more of just
Okay.
interesting
Well,
Could have been.
rumination, I guess.
The way that, as I understand that the church has spoken out time, is that we have chronology, right? We live in chronology, and chronology has a beginning and has an end, but that is a result of coming outside of the garden, right? And Keros is a reality that the Lord lives in, right? The fulfillment or the fullness of time. But it intersects chronology. So we don't, in the church, we don't necessarily look at time as timeline, here's creation, there's the end, the apocalypse. And we don't look at it like maybe the Egyptians did, like a circle. We're probably a little bit more like a spiral. Because there is a sense that you come back to Pascha and you live again the death and the resurrection of Christ. But it's now 2023. But it's the same celebration that was in the year 1000, in a sense, right? So again, in a fallen state, we're bound in chronology. So it's pretty hard for us to kind of get outside of that. But what I think I'm trying to, at least as my understanding goes, Luke, answer in that question is, I have not heard or read in the literature of the church that the appearance of Christ in the Old Testament is the post-resurrectional appearance of Christ. That I've always heard it being stated as pre-incarnate Christ.
So, not to get too deep, but
Yeah.
in Ethics and Beauty, which we read
Yeah.
last night, one of the things that I remember from that book is he kind of posits his own, once again, he just says it's his own opinion, but that the fall, the knowledge of the fruit of the tree was sort of this revelation to Adam and Eve of Christ's crucifixion.
Yes.
And that knowledge that they were not prepared for led to the fall, which brings up this whole, that sort of timeliness, right? It becomes a circle because at the beginning of time, they're almost seeing this fulfillment of time of Christ being crucified, which then kicks off the fall that leads to it. So I don't know. Thoughts?
I think it's you kind of full time in on itself, and you say, if I'm God and I'm outside of time, and obviously I'm omnipresent and all-knowing, is the understanding of the coming of Christ and his death on the cross and his resurrection already there?
Yes. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, in a sense, he knew, right? Yet that doesn't mean that we don't play it out.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like in the Genesis story, is it true that we hear of the gospel in the Genesis story?
Yeah.
Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
raise your hand if you know. So we hear of the serpent's head being crushed, but the heel being bit, right? The proto-evangelion, the first gospel, is there. It's in Genesis.
Okay.
Well, it took a long time, chronologically, from when that occurred and that word was spoken to get to the cross, didn't it? Right? So, in a sense, we're answering that idea that, it's all there. So I think when Dr. Timothy posits the idea that, possibly they were introduced to something that they weren't yet ready for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean...
Well, in that fall, he gets to it a little bit here, but in the podcast, one of the things that they talk about was a lot of the sin and fall comes from the evil entities giving knowledge to people
that we're not ready for. Same in this world.
That.
Mm-hmm.
It's not much different, is it?
Right. No.
It's not. Give a 15-year-old a car key and let them drink. And what's going to happen?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, it's not that complicated, but that's true. Very much so. Right? And we see it then even in practical advice that Paul gives, like, let not a new one become a priest or a bishop. Right? Let them prove that they can live this life of faith. Because, a lot of times in your newness, you're sophomoric. Right? You think you know more than you do.
Yeah.
Anybody who's had children has gone through that process a few times. Like, you really think you know something.
Oh my gosh.
You don't.
And then you find out how stupid you are.
You're right.
That's true too.
No, I was as stupid as
Yeah.
I actually, according to my teenage son.
Yeah. You'll gain wisdom in his eyes over time.
Yeah.
How long does it take?
Longer with some. Okay. What else is on your hearts as you read through this book? I mean, we're still kind of in that first beginning part of what we read, right?
Yeah, we're right. Yeah,
So what else comes to mind?
It was really encouraging for me just to know that, first that what we know as Christianity today isn't just made up, right? It's not a new thing.
Yeah.
It was continuation from, it's not like, okay guys, now we're going to have this new thing, we're going to follow Christ, it's like, no, they just kept what they were doing every day, just with the reality that the Messiah had come. Not, the Messiah coming didn't change how they worship God. God was still God. And that was just really encouraging to also know, and I read another book alongside of this because it's the commentary from John Chrysostom on the liturgy, and he cites 3 days after the resurrection, this is how they did the incense, this is how they, and so just to know that what we do isn't any different than what they did, and that our faith in Christ is the same as the apostles' faith in Christ, and that was a huge encouragement for me.
Yeah, and I want to just say a little commentary there that I agree with what you're saying, but what we shouldn't do is get wooden in our thinking of the melodies and the specific hymns, because sometimes people get to that point of thinking it's exactly the same in 2022 as it was in 33 AD plus 3 days.
Right.
The liturgy is exactly the same. And so, for example, the Archbishop and the Synod decided during COVID to insert the petition for the doctors and those doing research and the sick. There were people in the community who were like, you can't do that. It's been exactly the same since, and there was like, oh, you're missing the idea of saying.
Right.
So
Right.
we're not saying that.
Right, right.
But we are saying that the fullness of what Christ has shared and the living, embodiment of that in the church has been kept, right? And paradosis, have you ever heard of that word? Paradosis? Paradosis is the word that's translated in Scripture as tradition. But it's spoken of positively by Paul. A lot of us kind of wind of the idea that tradition was a bad thing.
Right.
But a paradosis is something. It's something you receive and then you faithfully, without adding or detracting, pass on. Right, and that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
We've received this full deposit of faith that we can live in.
Right. And of course, obviously we're in America, so it's not going to be the same as it was in Jerusalem, right? But
Yeah, we use English.
yeah, exactly. And and they didn't obviously read the Gospels and the New Testament because, well, those weren't written yet. But just the fact that it was a consistent thing, and from my background, that it wasn't somebody just made up stuff and was doing, because I lived that for 20 years. Yeah, let's do this. Sounds good, and this sounds, and we'll call it Orthodox.
Yeah.
And so just to know where it actually came from and what is real and what is,
And to live in something that's the continuation that makes Paul's writings in Rome and make sense.
right, exactly.
Right, in New Israel, right?
Yeah.
We've been grafted into something.
Yeah, so it was just really helpful for me.
Cool. How about
Mm-hmm.
other thoughts? Things that you, as you were reading through. You guys are poking around, looking for things. No?
Can I say a couple of things?
Of course you can.
I think he does a very nice job of introducing people to the complexity of Second Temple Jewish thought. I would prefer that he didn't use the word Second Temple Judaism. As academics would say Judaism is something that's a modern term. It really only is an invented term.
Right.
And you touched on the complexity of Jewish thinking, or the thinking among various Jewish factions in the Second Temple period, 1,000 years before Jesus and after Jesus. And I think he does a very nice job of introducing us to that. And the more we understand that world, the more we understand the Gospels. Because the Gospels are Jewish texts. They're not Christian texts, they're Jewish texts. And the ideas that are in there, the vocabulary that is in there, he does a nice job of teasing this out. That when Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man, he's saying that he is God. We tend to think that that's referring to his human side. When he refers to being the Son of God, that's a human title. That's the title for David, for the Messiah. And I think he does a nice job of introducing people to that. But it's sort of bimodal, and he talks about rabbinic Judaism and Christianity. They're the two survivors.
Yes.
They're the only two that survived. But there's a whole lot more going on, and I think he does. It's a wonderful introduction to that complexity, and the more you understand that world, you understand the thought processes of the people who are living in this time. And the language that Jesus used, the concept of Jesus as the Christ or the Messiah, or as the Son of Man, those are not after the fact ideas. No. What's new is the claim that Jesus is that. So that's where the debate is, not the debate over these ideas or things that people are waiting for.
Right.
So some people agreed, some people didn't agree, but Jesus is the new thing, not the ideas. I think he sets it up quite nicely in that first chapter. So.
Yeah, and it's hard too because, as you stated, he's taking something that's really pretty complex and large, and he's trying to distill it in a readable form.
Yeah, and this is not written for academics.
No.
This is written for normal people.
Yes.
And I think he does a really nice job.
Yeah, it's hard to navigate all that space.
Yeah. And if you read all the books in his bibliography plus another 30 or 40, you would understand where he got all this. I looked on Amazon, and that's the big criticism.
Yeah, large citations. Yeah.
I agree with that one because I want it to be a book written for me, but it's not written for me. It's written for you. And I already read those books, so I know where he's getting it from.
Well said.
So,
The only other thing that I wanted to note was it made me more sensitive to how anybody who lives now after Darwin, if you explain it within the term of an evolution, from simple, primitive to more complex, glorious progress, then that has an appeal of truth.
Yeah.
And obviously things change and develop over time, but there's a lot more continuity from generation to generation. I mean, in other words, you really have to understand in some ways the whole story. There's not this simple, just like the more ancient idea of there was this glorious past that we all down for. I mean, maybe that's not always the best model to understand things. Maybe things do get better, maybe. But that, just to be aware that our bias, if we want to call it that, toward this idea that Christianity evolved in a way, is a kind of a conditioning of our the way we think that's true. Things begin really primitive and small, and then
more complex as they go.
And they go. And so I think that that's a good thing to call out and say that's not always a litmus test of what is true.
Yeah. And it's true that many people, as they walk into the church, that's usually part of their hesitancy, is that they think, well, it seems like you guys have really complicated that should be something that should be much more simple.
Yes.
Right? And, this book is attempting to, change their understanding. That's not exactly how this all played out, right?
As if merely to go back is to just be primitive and simple. Right.
It's kind of a historical bias. Like, what do people back in the day know? We know so much more.
We do,
Right.
of course.
And in some ways,
I was disagreeing with
in
it.
material science, we do.
Certainly do.
Yeah. Yes.
Right, but in other ways, no. Language can be, if you were to say, well, how is it that we communicate in the written form in 2022 versus maybe 100 years ago? Might not be as complex. It might
That's
not.
hieroglyphics now. Little pictures of things.
What other thoughts come up as you read through? Go ahead.
That kind of leads to maybe another good part of the book, which is the divine counsel, right? Which is sort of this bringing back this idea that they're arguing was always present, which is it's not just you and God, it's you, God, the angelic beings, the saints, the fallen angels who are, ruling the principalities, and that's what Paul was referring to.
Yeah.
They bring in this whole comprehensive paradigm, which they say existed, and as things got modern and people said, oh, that's just superstition, that's boogeyman, and left it aside, I think they're trying to say, like, no, that's Christianity. That's that kind of like what you were saying, that's at the time what the view of the world was. And I just think that's interesting because we live now in a secular, largely Protestant society where, if you brought that concept, they would just be like, that's either idolatry, paganism, or worse. But, at least here they're saying, no, that's Christianity. The Bible contains God talking to these other angelic beings, which they say are, these lesser gods with a lowercase g. And that's just what it is. That's the spiritual reality. So I throw that out there because I know that's like a really interesting concept to some people.
Did that strike anybody as something new, or? Yeah, Ethan?
Struck me for sure, yeah.
How so?
I mean, I definitely wasn't taught that as growing up even in the Orthodox Church. I don't know if I just assumed it was monotheism or was taught that at some point. I had kind of a Protestant and Orthodox mixed education, so I don't know where I got some ideas from.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a lot of the stuff in here, don't feel like I got from being Orthodox. So a lot of the stuff, it's kind of, I don't know, interesting to relearn a lot of this. For sure.
Fair enough. Yeah, Steph?
I've also found great comfort in that, spiritual community.
Yeah.
I just feel like that was something that really drew me into orthodoxy from kind of a more individualistic mindset. And anything outside of Jesus was like scary almost. Like it would give me anxiety, like probably worshiping demons, I don't know, you know. And I was scared of things that like were not to be scared of, like as far as like all of these people that are part of the body of Christ. And so it's been really sweet for me to find like a sense of that community and feel like you're not alone in some ways. It's been really
there is certainly an attempt by Christians to move away from the idea of the counsel of God and to move into an idea of it's me, Jesus, that's really kind of it.
My Bible.
And maybe I bring my Bible along into that relationship, right? And so you can put away the ideas of the saints and angels and eventually anything that's metaphysical can just kind of go out the door except maybe God, right? And so, but it is foundational. So like for you, Ethan, growing up in the Protestant world and then becoming Orthodox, it's interesting to note that even in that transition, that foundational piece of like, no, this is the body of the church in which maybe this idea and concept that you're, steering us into, this whole counsel of Christ or whole counsel of God is part of the story, right? So the idea of the saints and the angels and all the rest, right? Has anybody read Acts recently? Yeah.
I taught it 2 weeks ago.
Huh? You were teaching it, yeah. So it's interesting, and I'm reading through Acts again right now, and in chapter 10, the angel visits Cornelius, and then the angel goes from Cornelius over to Peter and tells him some people are coming, and then the angel of the Lord it's like there's this constant working of angels, and then when we have our iconographer here, has anybody met Leonidas besides myself? He's fantastic, right?
It's so fun.
So he's talking to me about the iconography, and he stops. He goes, Father, we have to have angels. We have to have angels. Right? And so even within his sensibility of the artistic rendering, he knows there has to be the ministration of angels. We have to depict them, right? We can't leave them out, In some way, he was a little worried, like, here's this kind of Greek boy, but he's up there in the environs of who knows where, Loveland, and they're going to take the angels out.
Right.
So he knows the angels. We have to have the angels. Right. Yeah.
I wonder if the idea of a divine council, though, is harder for Americans because we don't really like the idea of hierarchy.
No. Well, there is this thing that happens for us as Americans in the religious history that occurs that we inherit, right? We inherit kind of a specific view of the Christian faith, right? And we don't even really inherit. This is my argumentation. I don't think that as Christians we in America inherited kind of the full, let's say, witness of even Protestantism.
Yeah.
Right? Is that fair to say?
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Because it was Puritans, right? Which is
I think a little bit. Yeah, I think it was a little bit whittled down. I mean, of course, there's a lot going on in the founding of the United States, but it seems to be that we settled in on this idea that there is no need of priests and hierarchs, right? There's no rites or sacraments that are efficacious, right? And we did kind of settle on the idea that it's, the church is pretty invisible, right? You might be part of it, but someone over there might be part of it, right? And then, it's just you and Jesus, right? And that's all you need. So, you don't have to go to church in that reality, do you?
Yeah, you don't.
What's its point? I can do that all at home, right?
It's terrifying, though. You and the creator of the universe. Nobody else. No pressure.
No pressure. Right, just gonna be you.
Just you and him.
Go out in
Good
nature
luck.
and they're like, this is church. That's like a common thing I would hear. It's like, well, I can go out in nature and be in church. And it's like,
Yeah.
but that's like essentially
Be in the
that.
presence of the Lord. It's not church.
Yeah. So interesting.
So are there any other thoughts? Because I have kind of a concluding place I'd like to go. when we're kind of done with some.
I have a question. I can't remember if it was first or second chapter, somewhere in there, where, anyway, the author said when Jesus, went before the Pharisees and all and said he was the Son of Man, he was declaring himself God. But he said they weren't so upset that he claimed to be the Messiah. It was that he claimed to be God. But to me, Messiah means God. Was it something about the Jews at that time or the Pharisees that Messiah meant more the earthly person, the earthly leader who would... Anyway, I just wonder why was that difference?
Right, for that historical context, I do want to tap the professor over here, but it's my understanding that, Israel had many messiahs in a sense, right?
Okay.
Deliverers. Is Moses a type? Right? So, it's not the same claim necessarily.
Okay.
Linking them, though, Messiah and God. How would you posit that?
Well, David is Messiah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Saul is Messiah. Aaron is Messiah.
Lots
Cyrus
of Messiahs.
is Messiah. Just the anointed of God. So when Jesus, in the Psalms, the Messiah is called the Son of God. God adopts him as a son. So when Jesus, in Mark 4, when he's asked by the Pharisees, "Are you the Messiah?" he says, "Yes." And then he says, "And you will see the Son of Man come."
Then we're in trouble.
Wow. Then
That's
they
the
freak
trouble.
out.
Right.
Because that's when he's quoting Daniel 7. He's claiming to be God. That's a bridge too far.
Yeah.
Well, that helps because, again, to me, this is my Protestant background, the Messiah, there's only one Messiah.
No.
And it was right. Anyway, just saying.
And that's
so
why I was
that
saying,
was
like,
the
that there are many messiahs, like deliverers. In a sense, it's how we can also say to Mary, "Most Holy Mother of God, save us." Right? She's a type of savior, deliverer, or messiah, I should say, because she delivers us from something. Right? Now, she's not the Christ. Right? It's a good question.
I was really interested to read that Plato had described
Right.
the government of the world
Yeah, in such
as
terms.
the divine council. It's on page 72. I mean, he talks about Kronos, the father of Zeus, was aware of the fact that no human being, as we have explained, is capable of having irresponsible control of all human affairs without becoming filled with pride and injustice. I was like, wow, they knew that way back then. So true. And he just goes on to explain. And so the kings and rulers of the cities were appointed then, they were not men. It's like the whole thing that DeYoung is saying.
Yeah.
And Plato
Had it.
explained it.
Well,
And that was
yeah,
fascinating.
I think just sort of the argumentation there too is that what is found within the thinking of, let's say, Plato, and then maybe even the cult of Baal, is reconditioned within the revelation of God, right? That it's reconditioned, and we find the true story here. So the overthrow of the Father by the divine Son. No, that, those types of ideas, right, that Father Stephen's pointing out. And in a sense, I think, maybe I'm reading him wrong, but in a sense, I think what he's also saying is, see, there's evidence.
Right.
And it wasn't like they were sending each other texts, like, okay, now put that down, right? Right, it's sort of in the thinking of the people.
That was fascinating to me. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, holy pagans, almost. Right. Chris?
I had kind of a question relating to what Brenda was saying a little bit. I read a book a while ago in my Protestant realm. I think it was a Protestant academic. It was called God Crucified, but it's about Second Temple Judaism. And he sort of talked about how because the Jews of this time were sort of dispersed and intermingled with pagan societies, they had very clear definition on who God was, so that they wouldn't sort of get mixed up with these other spiritual practices they were intermingled with. And so like the titles, Son of Man, Son of God, and a lot of the times where Jesus claims to be God, like to like a normal modern person's eye, we wouldn't like catch that all the time.
Right. They would.
But they do because
Yes.
they have this very clear understanding of this title is claiming to be
Yes.
God.
Yeah. He does a really good job in the book, and I think that's exactly what you were sharing earlier. It's like there are these phrases that we sort of just walk over and or miss or apply wrongly. And for them, we're like, you know, coming on the clouds.
Yeah.
Oh, well, now we got a problem.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's exactly, you know, putting us back in that context. These texts start to mean different things. Now, what's interesting is if you're careful in sort of living through the liturgical life, those, let's say, the hermeneutic of that or the explanation is in the liturgical life. Like the meaning is captured in the hymns and the movements of the church.
It was an interesting thing that Father Stephen brought up in the Lord's Spirits when they were talking about Pascha, and that
The psalm.
the psalm and how the psalm is a response to the Baal cycle, but like that was lost in history up until but it still exists in the liturgy. It still exists in the life of the church. Just some of the background to what was going on there maybe had been lost a little bit in memory. It's just interesting stuff, and that's one of the things with this book in particular too, is that the stuff he's talking about is it's there in front of us all the time.
Yeah.
Just sometimes we don't get it or whatever it is, you know, because we weren't raised in a culture that lives this out. It's hard to grasp sometimes, but he's not really saying new things. I guess that's kind of what I'm starting to see.
Yeah, I think he's attempting to articulate something that is in the life of the church.
Yeah.
But perhaps by lifting it out and sort of laying it in the book, you can start to piece it together.
Yeah.
But it's something that my great-grandmother, who couldn't read, got.
Right.
Because she lived in the church,
Yeah.
right, in its cycles, right? And she knew all the hymns. And you'd ask her, what's today? And she'd say, oh, it's the Feast of St. George. And then she'd sing the Troparium. Like, okay, yeah. You know, what were you going to say?
No, it's there, and I think you're both right. And I think part of what he's doing here is this is a reclamation project,
Yeah.
and he's illustrating that this book could not have been written 150 years ago because we just didn't know. I mean, archaeology did not have the text from Syria or from Iraq that gives us those things. And as the church became more Gentile, it lost touch with its Jewish roots, and unfortunately, in my opinion, turned on its Jewish roots. And so this is a part of reclaiming that and helping us understand where we come from and how we fit into this larger picture in a more complex way. Not that anything before was missing. That's not what I'm saying. I think it helps us understand the things that your grandmother understood implicitly. Now we can understand a little bit more fully.
Yeah. He's making it explicit. He's
Yeah.
lining it out, saying, here it is.
This is how we got to where your grandma just took it for granted.
Yeah.
And I think he's doing a great service.
I would agree. And having had the experience as a younger priest of knowing kind of about 2 generations back, there were still some priests that were in their 90s, you know, that had, and the way that they served the liturgy was really formative for me. You know, the way that they understood the life of the church, it was like tapping into something that was dying out, but I had it, and I remember saying one time, because someone said to me, there'd been this new community that had formed, and there's nothing wrong. I don't mean this to be derogatory or pejorative or anything like that, but the entire community had never been Orthodox, including the priest, and they came in whole cloth, and somehow it was off. And the people who knew it was off were the people from the old country. They were like, you know, like everything was in its right place, but and it felt like they had brought in their sort of Gentile understanding and just sort of they put icons up. And so I think that's what he's attempting to do, is put us back in touch in an explicit way with who are we as Christians. Like, well said. Other thoughts? Okay, so my concluding question, I guess, to all of us is, all right, great. You've read these really fascinating, helpful, facts. How are you gonna? I mean, I'm a pastor. It's nice to have the book and
You gotta bring it home.
fill your head, but if you go home and you're mean to your wife, it just really doesn't. So how can you see yourself in a real way applying in a way that's transformative and leads you deeper into repentance and holiness some of the things you've read? And that may be a large stretch, but it's a question that is certainly on my mind. Because, Father Gabriel and I were discussing the book over the last couple of weeks, and that's the question that the two of us were debating. You can listen to Lord of Spirits. It's really fascinating. But how does it change how you live? Any thoughts? Chris?
So for me, having listened to all the episodes, hundreds of hours, what it's done for me is it gives me a new filter on how to think, right? And it's not something that it's always there, but it's something I can tap into the same way I can tap into my own professional knowledge in a situation or my own experience. You get this spiritual filter of these energies at play, and that you're always participating within energy. I think one of the things that the Lord of Spirit priests always say is there is no neutral action. You're either cooperating with God or you're cooperating with the other side. And when you start, war. Yeah, it's a war, and every action is part of that. You are animated by one of these spirits, and I think it helps you in every situation to realize, oh wait, I'm channeling the bad energy, right? Like this, what's coming out of my mouth or what I'm doing isn't cooperating with God. Let's retune or readjust, and I think that's
helpful for you.
Yeah.
So one of the ways that we can say that I think what you said is really important. So we talk about orthodoxia, right belief, right glory, but that has to lead to right practice. So it's really important to have the right thinking, to know the right things, so that you can do the right things. So that's, in a way, you're saying it's good to know that there's this war. The war's been won, but I'm in the midst of it. There's evil action, and there's action that's aligned with God, and there's no neutral ground here, right? And that helps you to filter what you're doing, and then think, when I just did what I did, that's not right. That's not of God. Yeah, it's very helpful. Good point. Okay, what else have you? Yes, please.
Will is my name.
I will.
So, with Lord of Spirits, Father Stephen D. Young, Andrew Damick is the other. Yeah, and I feel they're both fantastic podcasts, but I feel like they hit at a very academic level,
They do.
more cerebral level. Yeah. And this is just my personal feeling. I listen to, I think it's Father Nicholas Corey, who does Daily Orthodox Bible all the time. And that hits me on a spiritual level. That hits me at a point where I want to change. I need to recognize issues in my own life and try to go to another direction. And I kind of feel like this is great, but it's not the same as the scripture. It's not the same as, it doesn't orient me in the same way as I would say,
And that's why I'm asking the question.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Because, Father Curry's podcast he's really coming from the parish priest perspective, right? He's living with, now let's save this. That's one of the reasons why I think the church esteems people like Basil the Great and John Chrysostom so much, is that they were able to write in these ways that blew your mind. I mean, they were the cream of the crop, right? But they were also pastors. They also were shepherding sheep. And they had to get people into the kingdom, but not lose anyone along the way.
Yeah, I think that this book ties both of them together, because even the things that we talked about tonight, as you read the Gospels on your own at home, or you hear them read in church, you will understand them in new ways, because they've helped you contextualize them a little bit better. And as you hear Father Corey read, I love that podcast, because I like the Bible. And as you walk, as the words wash over you, you understand them and hear them in new ways because you've understood a little bit more about the world in which they were written.
Yeah.
I think that both comments tie together very nicely.
Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive
No, not at all.
by any means.
No.
And obviously for those of us who are struggling to enter the kingdom, right, and to be a child of light, it's important to figure out how it is that we're going to take what we're reading and learning and apply it so that we are better spouses, better friends, but transformed, right? Not just, morally better. We're not after moral improvement per se, right? That's a pretty dry pursuit. So what else did you find that's helping you? Yes, Ethan.
I think like when you were talking about your yaya being kind of steeped in that culture of orthodoxy,
church,
and just being able to recite things and like being an academic and being in going to school right now, that feels like couldn't be further from what that kind of goal would be.
Right.
But a book like this or a book like The Language of Creation was really, really helpful for me recently because it basically gave all this spiritual wisdom and amazing stuff, but in a format that I was really used to. So it kind of read like a manual or documentation that I'm used to reading every day, as a programmer.
It's a bridge.
Yeah, so it kind of takes the way my brain's already been formed and turns it in this other way that kind of, hopefully at some point in the, far future, that academic culture that a lot of us are steeped in America can become that culture that your yaya was steeped in.
One of the ways I tried to explain that for how my yaya operated was, if you've seen the manger scenes, and they're all like there's baby Jesus. My yaya would have walked in and picked him up.
Yeah.
Right? She would have been like, "Oh, this baby." You know what I mean? And she would have interacted in this very intimate way with the baby, and But the depiction of those Christians are like everybody's just kind of like contemplating, this divine mystery. Anyway, what other ways is hilarious?
Yeah,
just
I'd have
funny,
picked him up too.
Yeah,
Jesus is here.
Yeah.
So look, it's a baby.
Anybody want to hold him?
Thoughts about this right now.
Right. Or it's like, the peaches are in season from the Western Slope, and you're like, let's talk about the peach.
How is it peaches?
Right. And, the monastics that I know would walk in and be like, taste that.
Yeah.
It's the greatest thing.
It's a really good peach.
That goes to raising a child in the church, right? James is like 16 months old. He doesn't understand any of the words. But if I put him to any of the icons or anything, he kisses it because he knows now. So he knows to interact, even though he doesn't understand the actual word, but he understands interacting with those objects.
Right.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
It is.
Scott?
I think too, just in this conversation at the end, it's helping me see how I can come to these texts and get an ego boost, or I can come to these texts and find more humility.
Yes.
Of like when I think about Christ being in the Old Testament, which I was not raised to understand that, it can be extremely humbling.
Yeah.
Or I can take that and brag and have an ego boost about how I know more than my friends. And it's like, I think it's just such a good reminder that if I am going to interact with this text, it needs to be in pursuit of like a deeper humility that actually like makes me want to go home and like have a call to repentance and like go home and like have, some time at the altar. And that's how I want to interact with this. I mean, if I'm getting anything else out of it, I probably need to even like stop because it's probably feeding my ego, the two energy thing, right? So it's just good to think about that going into this.
Yeah, I mean, to sort of preach a little bit into that is when we sat down and discussed as a community years ago what was going to be sort of the way we would define ourselves. We said, well, an Orthodox community where people find transformation in Jesus Christ. And so I've been in enough situations, and with even people investigating Christianity, to know that they can get really caught up in the things they're learning, and they can weaponize them. And it's sort of like, it's pretty gross, right? And there's a good reason why people that we encounter when they find out that we're Christian may be a little dissatisfied with that reality. And so it's so important as we're reading through this stuff to see that it has to have, I think it has to have that application to our daily life. And I think as you stated, it was so beautiful, like it needs to lead me towards humility. I can't operate with some sort of pride in this thing.
You taught me that, so.
Oh.
It's not with you.
There's Jesus.
Even knew I had an ego.
Well, if I'm able to teach it, God willing, it's only because that I have too often failed. And I've stubbed my toe enough times that I don't want to stub my toe anymore, and I don't want to cause anyone else to stub their toe. And I don't want to become a community that articulates Christianity in such a way that we really create these hard corners and fine lines, and we're pushing people away. I want to be a place where we can create this bridge. And so as I'm reading this book, it's helpful for me, but I want to be able to utilize it in such a way that my own life is changed, and I become a more lovely follower of Jesus. That's a key for me. So that's why I'm asking, what have you seen in here? Have you read that you can bring home, and apply? And we'll ask this question at the end of each of our. Now you're forewarned.
Spoiler.
Forewarned.
Spoiler.
Yeah, then we'll do this at the end of each one because we've got 2 more. Is that the goal? Right?
Yeah, 3 months, and so we're going to read probably 4 through 6 for the next month. We'll set a date. I'll find your availability, and then I'll send out. It'll be pretty much the same setup.
But our goal is to meet in January and then again in February.
And then change books.
Yeah, because Lent begins February 27th is Clean Monday, I think. Oh. Yes, so we will start a book study for Lent. And so we'll conclude with this one before the Lent.
I think you already gave us a January date, didn't you? It's on my calendar.
I don't know.
Maybe we did. Well, look, let us know if we did.
Let us know.
She's like,
I
know when it is.
I know when we're meeting.
We might need to meet at that time because it came to you.
That's right.
It might be
The
important.
definite date is.
Anyway, I
Yeah,
don't have it with me, but late January or Thursday. Anyway, maybe.
Is anybody a fan of Seinfeld?
Yes.
Oh.
So do you know how Seinfeld talks about it? How do they know that's when the milk expired? Is it the cows tipping them off? It's going to be Tuesday tonight. All right, so just sort of as we're wrapping up, we'll plan to meet in January, chapters 4 through 6. If there's anyone that you want to invite along, that's fine. They don't have to have read the book. It's just nice to have the discussion. And then we may end up here again because of just the size. Is that okay for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
That works.
And these recordings, I don't know how we're going to share them. We'll probably talk to Matt and maybe find out whether we put them on the website, whether we...
Sure, we could create a new little book study for the...
And that way, if you all ever want to refine these, they'll be there.
Okay. Yes, Brenda.
Can I ask that everyone help clean up?
Yes.
Not just take your food, but someone needs to take the trash out. We need to
All
wipe
those things.
tables.
Yeah, we've got a busy weekend.
Yeah, if everyone could help, we'll be done in 10 minutes.
That's putting the book into action right there.
So I'm going to just give a couple quick notes here just to make sure everyone's on the same page. So we will have Vespers Saturday night, and then Sunday morning the bishop will arrive at 8:15. So if you want to be here when he arrives, the new bishop, it'll be my first time being the new bishop here. So he'll be here at 8:15. Liturgy will be at 9:30 as it normally is, and then there'll be a luncheon to follow. And then Sunday evening we'll have Vespers again at 5. The Feast Day Vespers for our festal liturgy on Monday morning. And we have 2 luncheons that Brenda and her teams have prepared. So thank you, Brenda. A lot of hard work there. So we need to leave it better than we found it right now so that the team doesn't come in Sunday morning and go, oh no.
Right.
So let's say a closing prayer. Glory to thee, O Christ, our true God, and our hope. Glory to thee. For those of you who know the hymn of Pentecost, we'll sing it together. Oh, blessed are you, O Christ our God, who by sending down the Holy Spirit upon them, made the fishermen wise, and through them illumined the world. And to you the universe was ever drawn. All glory to you, O Lord. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with each of you. Amen. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Chris.
Yes.
And join me by extension at the bookstore. So thank you so much. Awesome.